Arklow is an ancient Irish town located on the east coast of Ireland with a provenance of history stretching back to Neolithic times. This town has been directly involved in many major historical events, such as the Viking and Norman conquest, the rise and fall of a Christian priory, the wrath of Cromwell, and the 1798 revolution. Today, the remnants of Arklow's medieval history can only be found on land registers or in named locations like the Abbey graveyard. Dominican monks established a priory here in the 13th century. Most of its medieval history was believed to be lost, until recent excavations on the site have exposed a wealth of new and exciting discoveries. Yvonne Whitty, a national archaeologist, explains in detail the historical value of these finds.
Hi, my name is Yvonne Whitty and I'm an archaeologist, and we're here in the Abbey graveyard to do test trenching before there's a planned development for a paving seating area. So what we're doing is we're coming in, because we're beside the Abbey graveyard, what we're doing is we're coming in first to see if there are any burials here or if any archaeological remains, so that we can design around it. So the main findings that we have is that that in this area, when we came in first, there was an awful lot of disarticulate bone, which is fragments of bone completely strewn throughout the topsoil. So we cleaned it back, and we found that probably when the buildings were being built here originally, they disturbed a lot of burials. And what we found then is the remains of, there's a leg bones here, so the wall has been built on top of them. We found toes as well coming out this direction. And then, but when you come to, we'll say, about a metre out from the wall, the area seems to be, there's no burials at all, so we know the extent of them. But we did find potentially earlier burials. So these probably are late, maybe 1800s, pre-1800s. But we found down in some of these trenches here, potentially earlier burials at a deeper level. So this you can see this fragment of a skull, and it was found at 40 centimetres down. And in this layer as well, we also got medieval pottery and 17th century pottery also. In the northern end of the trench over here, and that's covered in plastic. So you can see we have a burial here, one in the centre here, another skull deeper down, and then at the very far end, we have what is probably the earliest burial. And again, we found the leg bones at about 1 metre 15 centimetres in depth. And this is in the first trench that we excavated. So what we're trying to do now here is to kind of get an idea of the archaeology, where it is, so that when they're designing the paving area, that we don't impact on the burials and that we can leave them in situ. So the proposal is to take off about 20 centimetres and then to build paving on top. And now we're looking at ways, how can we redesign it to leave the burials that are under the wall intact, or maybe we'll put in a flower bed there. And also, how can we then, the next stage is how can we mark out the archaeology that's here, so that people are really connecting with their heritage still. So that was our job, was to just make sure that when they didn't start digging for the paving, that all of a sudden that there was burials extending right underneath the paved area. So we know that there isn't, and we know that they're confined to the walls up there, and then we know that there's 3 more scattered, but they're at a deeper level.
Due to past and very recent unsupervised development, over 90% of its medieval archaeology has been lost forever. Thankfully, this site has not succumbed to this, and a wealth of medieval artefacts have been retained, as explained in detail by archaeologist Colm Moriarty.
Hello, my name is Colm Moriarty. I'm an archaeologist working on this site with Yvonne Whitty. Right, we found a number of sherds of pottery in Abbey Lane's Arklow. I'm just going to run through 3 of the types here. The first one is this piece here. It's a type known as Frecken. It's actually imported from Germany in the 17th century, and they were typically used for drinking beer and stuff like that. So it's quite a high status piece, and you normally get them in urban contexts in Ireland. And this is the second piece. We're going back actually earlier now. This is back to the 13th and 14th century. It's a piece of medieval jug. So if you look closely here, you can see the spout. And this would have been quite a fine piece of pottery to have in your house. It's wheel thrown, and it would have been used for serve and wash, but also wine at the table. So it's a nice piece of pottery. It's high status. And the final piece is also medieval pottery. It's from the 12th, 14th century. And if you see on this side, it's all black. That's because it's a cooking pot. It's a utilitarian piece of pottery. It's used for cooking stews and stuff like that. It's placed directly in the fire, and it slow cooks the food away. And that's quite common. It's called Leinster cooking, where you get it all through Leinster, rural sites and urban sites. And that's the most basic type of medieval pottery in Ireland. So that's the 3 types.
This site is the very last area in the town that has remained undisturbed for centuries and should be preserved forever so that future generations can learn and enjoy their medieval history. Here is Jim Rees, a local historian, giving a brief description on this part of Arklow's amazing history.
Hello, I'm Jim Rees, a local historian and chairman of Arklow Maritime Museum. And we're here to talk about the Dominican Abbey, where some excavations have been going on. As we can see now, the Abbey, it's just a graveyard, but it was part of a very large complex that was closed in 1539. It was the Dominican order had it, and they opened the Abbey in 1264. In Arklow, it's always referred to as the Abbey, but in fact, it was never really a full Abbey. The proper name was the Priory of the Holy Cross, and it was the Dominican orders. So they needed money to continue it and to repair it, and so they sought the right to grant indulgences to anybody who supported the Priory through prayer or attending services or anything else like that. Selling indulgences was a practice whereby people who had sinned or felt they had sinned would get remittance of their period in purgatory by contributing financially to a religious institution. And it was a major fundraiser right across Europe for the Catholic Church. It's one of the things that the Reformation kicked up against. But the Priory in Arklow benefited, and it benefited quite a bit because we were able to rebuild the Priory. And it kept going until 1539. Now in 1539, Henry VIII was having his marital problems and his disagreement with the papacy at the time. And as part of the retaliation, that Henry VIII declared himself the head of the church in England, Ireland, Scotland and Wales, and he closed down all the monasteries. And that's why the Dominican Abbey, or Priory in Arklow, was closed in 1539. The Battle of Arklow was fought on Saturday, the 9th of June, 1798. It was one of the pivotal battles in the whole 1798 rebellion. Insurgents in Wexford had taken over the county and were heading north to Dublin. So Arklow was pivotal. It was very important that the rebels take Arklow Bridge. But the town itself was actually garrisoned by the British Army and local loyalists. And it was fought over a 6-hour period. And one of the strongholds for the defence was in the graveyard, the Abbey graveyard. There was also a church there as part of the graveyard, a church that had replaced the old Priory Chapel. And there were snipers in there, and they were shooting. They were to protect the town from any Wexford insurgents who were coming down what used to be called the Yellow Lane, but is now Abbey Street, Connolly Street, all that area. And they could have come across the fields to attack the Abbey and thereby break into Main Street that way. So the Abbey graveyard was absolutely pivotal, and they had snipers in there, as I say, and they actually held the Abbey. The entire battle lasted 6 hours, but just through bad luck, the rebels actually lost and were beaten back at Arklow. Had they not been, there could have been a very different story as regards Irish history. The 1798 rebellion could have proved successful, except for the Battle of Arklow. Long after the Priory, the Dominican Priory, had gone and been demolished, some of the stones used for storehouses and boundary walls for local properties, long after that had vanished, the graveyard was still in use as the burial for Catholics. It was the Catholic graveyard from about the mid-16th century up until 1866. And the reason it closed then in 1866 was there was a major cholera epidemic spread through Arklow, particularly the fishery area. And there were mass burials in the Protestant graveyard in Main Street in St Mary's and the Catholic graveyard here at the Abbey. It was too dangerous to have cholera victims buried in the middle of the town, so it was decided as soon as that cholera epidemic was over, both of those graveyards were closed in October of 1866. There was a new cemetery created, there was a plot given over for it up where the present graveyard is now, and the first burial in there was in 1870. So the big question we're trying to answer is, between the closure of the 2 graveyards in the town in 1866 and 4 years later with the opening of the new cemetery, where were the people buried who died in that period? We don't know, but we do know that that was the last of the Abbey graveyard.
Arklow, an Irish coastal town slowly releasing its historical secrets. This history can be preserved forever and not become a victim of previous apathy, allowing the past to be experienced once more. Who knows what this untapped wealth of history will expose in this very ancient and historical town of Arklow.